Welcome back to our final session of this event. And I think it shows something about the interest of this topic that we still have over 100 people with us. So well done for those of you who've made it all afternoon. Thank you for making time for this. So this is a slightly different session topic in that this is more of an interactive teaching session in which I'm going to be joined by Olivia Baskerville as PG Art student, more of which anon. But just to remind you, we're using the chat box. So do make sure you've got the chat box up that you can see it. We're going to be using that as a classroom. We'll have some activities based on it. And also, I'll really be welcoming comments and challenges in that. We're still working away at the Q&A. And for those of you who've asked about recordings, so as Ellie's just put in the chat box, we're going to do our best to put the recordings in on the IES website. I'm also going to provide a PDF of the slides here, supplemented with some answers about jobs websites that you were asking earlier in the session. So we will have some follow-up resources. So warm welcome to this final session. We're going to take about 50 minutes. I aim to finish about 10 to 5 on how to develop and communicate your PhD and transferable skills. And, what a warm-up acts I've had. This is almost our third take on this topic, but I hope this is also one in which you get a chance to make it really personal to you. My goal at the end of the day, and I will be asking you at the end of this session, looking at everything you've heard today, what might your next step be? What might you be doing differently going forward to develop and communicate your PhD transferable skills? So this is what we're going to cover in the next 50 minutes, building on what's been said before about why PhD skills are needed more than ever in the job market, but particularly to look at in a fresh way and with the help of Olivia on those transferable skills that have been articulated by our panelists, by Kate, and now we're going to give you an opportunity to articulate those in a slightly more active way. And then how do you enhance them and particularly market, and a phrase that has come across time and time this afternoon, construct the narrative. And also, and this was mentioned by a couple of our panelists, how you can boost and build your network. So that's quite ambitious for 50 minutes. So we're going to do it in a pacey way. As I say, you will have a copy of these slides, but also at the end, I will be encouraging you to reach out to your own career services because much of what I've done is an overview and a highlights of sessions you can get from many career services, focusing on just one of these topics, whereas we're going to do an overview today. And the theme of this session is particularly, why from Claire's first speech, are we being so optimistic and positive about your life chances? And it is because of our perception that you are thoughtful discoverers, that reflective practice, absolutely core to academic research and a PhD, of a project management roller coaster. And I kept score while our panelists were talking, and noticed that every single one of them, mentioned project management. And certainly when I've worked with PhD students for 20 years, had hundreds of conversations, and they often talk to me about the ups and downs, so much so that I now run a session called Managing the PhD Roller Coaster, because that is what people experience it. And for those of you who in the room who are currently experience the second year blues, which is a very common phase, I hope that's a comfort to you, that this roller coaster experience is absolutely embedded, intrinsic to the PhD process. I mean, I think, Claire put a finger on it at the beginning in talking about it being a terrifying time. But the whole world is now on a roller coaster. So some of you will have come across the phrase VUCA. This was a phrase that was originally originated in the defense industry through the Pentagon and has been used quite a lot now in economic and social analysis to describe environments, including commercial and economic environments, that are volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. That describes most of the modern world. We are not the first generation to feel this, and it was with a particular pleasure that I referenced Charles Dickens. As many of you will know his phrase of his description of the French Revolution. I think what was true in 1789 feels very pertinent now. I'm a classicist and historian by background, and so I'm used to looking at phrases, ages of stability and ages of disruption. We are clearly in an age of disruption. Another age of disruption where suddenly many areas started reaching for thoughtful, reflective, curious thinkers was World War II. And when I was preparing this, I thought of the parallels with Bletchley Park and how many people were recruiting from the humanities to work at the analytical work and the problem-solving work at Bletchley Park. So it seems to be that in times, VUCA times, people tend to reach for thoughtful, resilient thinkers. And if I had to pick out two words from all the ones that have been said this afternoon, that for me epitomize so many of my PhD students that I have the pleasure of working with, it would be resilient reflectors. They think deeply and in a complex way, and they're resilient. And when they hit an intellectual wall, they look at it, they pick themselves up, and they try and go around it another way. Great qualities. And I think, and I said, by the time we've got to this point, I do hope that we've done what we sought to do today, which is, to bust a conceptual box, that it is very easy in academia, and I have worked in academia for 32 years, that it can sometimes have a shrinking effect to the people who study and work within it. And I think that is particularly true for PhD students, that you become your PhD, you are defined by your PhD. The rigor of the academic critical process, which we need in order to do the research work, starts to broaden to the individual, and people start questioning their worth. And this has been amplified by, Kate, you described the environment of the academic, I call it choppy, I think she called it fractured. That there's that market which is unsettling us. There's also this sense that as you work on your disciplinary pinhead, you are aware of the huge ocean of knowledge. In a way, that's the sign of a fine academic mind, to realize how huge the discipline is. But, that can make us feel very small. And as Kate referenced, the current public discourse around questioning the value of the humanities. So all of these can make us feel a little small. And what I really hope one of the results of this event is to reframe that and to bust that box and say, this box is too small for you. Don't think about yourself that way. Reframe the narrative. Through our inspirational panelists, we saw 4 different paths, and we could have featured many more, as Claire showed us. But I think sometimes it's useful not only to have inspirational stories and role models, but also to do some mapping. So this is a categorization that I use sometimes with my PhD students to say that, like Claire, I see many people leveraging their PhD. Something I often say is your PhD is a lifelong asset. Most of you will get there. 99% of PhDs do. I particularly address this to those of you who are currently hitting a research wall. You will get there. You will have that doctoral status, as well as the intrinsic satisfaction of having achieved that. It is a lifelong asset in terms of your credibility. I think that is often least visible immediately after the PhD, but it accelerates and keeps giving for the rest of your career. And why is that? It is because of this PhD honed skills and mindset. And I put mindset in there deliberately because some of those qualities, like resilience, which, very helpfully, one of our panelists showed, the response from her prospective boss, people respect rigorous achievement. So if you present your experience, as was said, presents your PhD like a job successfully delivered, then those qualities are valued and are very useful in and build the foundation of your subsequent professional success. So this is an example of where do we find humanities PhDs? Well, all over the place, but I could take Claire's list and I could group them into categories. So those where people are working quite closely to their subject, I think Beth would be an example of that. And so I put her in cultural and creative and sector management professionals. And those who are actually using those PhD honed skills and mindsets in a new focus. So, and that's, and again, I've divided it into leadership and expert roles. So I think I put Maria, for example, in that bottom right-hand quadrant on expert roles. So again, just a sense of different paths, but you will find humanities PhDs in every square of this graph. And the further you are away from your subject focus, the more that skills become important. They are the currency of all job markets, including academic job markets, which we're not so much looking at today, but particularly important when you make a pivot. So when I was preparing for this session, I did a little survey of some of our IES PhD students and asked them this question. And I'd like to ask you the same question. So make sure you got the chat box up. No right or wrong answers. I just really want to know. And this is for the PhD students. I know I've got both students and their advisors and academics in the room, but this is for the students. Thank you so much, Genevieve, starting us off. This question's for the students. I'd just like to hear, your perspective, because I'm always interested. So we've got project management. If we've done nothing else today, we've got people going out going, I do a PhD, I manage projects, which is a great skill in the modern age. Lots of resilience coming up, time management coming up, evidence. I'm glad to see evidence analysis. We can see we've got, what else have we got? Interesting, fascinating. I'm seeing that I'm just letting a scroll. I don't think anyone's voted for 5 yet. I can see, oh yeah, Matthew's voted for 5. Oops. The joy of Zoom that sometimes you jump. Okay, thank you. Great. Let's have a look at what my little subgroup of IES students said. So this is what they said. And just as I was looking for 5, that what surprised me, I'm sure that many of you are demonstrating all these skills. A couple of features here, I'd be shocked if with English PhD students, writing skills didn't get a good shout out. And I'd be shocked with any group of PhD students if resilience didn't get a good shout out. And I'm delighted to hear people starting to claim their project management skills. A couple of things here, and again, it's all about the language we use and reframing, is that I took advice from Olivia as to whether I should call evidence analysis data analysis. And we agreed that if we called it evidence analysis, humanities students were more likely to claim it than if we called it data analysis, which some people would suddenly immediately think, oh, that must be numbers or something more technical than I've got. Actually, it's the same thing. You're looking at a fact or a piece of data. A datum can be anything. And so it just shows how sometimes by changing language, you both empower people, and how sometimes language people are being unnecessarily careful around it. So I think it's worth saying that every time you hear someone talk about data analysis, think evidence analysis, and you are more likely to carry yourself confidently. I have the pleasure of working with an English graduate, and we were talking about some data analysts. She said to me, it's just counting, isn't it, Liz? I said, yeah, a lot of the time it is. So that's one where I see humanities students disempower themselves in a world that is slightly in love with the term data analysis. And most of it is just really simple counting. And believe me, you can do it. So that's one, and we'll come back to that theme when we look at digital skills. The other one, which, I was surprised it didn't get a vote in my admittedly little group of IES students, but actually was the least popular with you. So now I'm wondering whether we got a significance here, is influencing skills. I do wonder whether this reflects the fact that my population is mainly female, and so that therefore we undervalue our people skills because we are socialized to do them. And so we don't see them as skills, we just see them as being a person. And so, because undoubtedly you will talk to a range of people while you do your PhD, not just your supervisor, people in the department, other stakeholders, librarians, there will be ways in which you persuade and influence. My experience also as my English PhDs is they have got very good people skills. So I just wonder whether it's so intrinsic to you that you're not naming it. And one of the things that Kate does a lot is talk about how we extract our skills. And sometimes some of our strongest skills are the ones that are least visible to us. But moving on to extracting skills, and I've got some, Matthew just said, no, I didn't mean 5, I meant 6. So, okay, thank you, Beth. Well, now we're going to do a global first. Now, I don't believe that this has been done before. If it has, I don't know about it. That we're actually going to do some live chat skill passing for an English PhD. And I'd like to give warm thanks to Olivia, who's going to be joining me in this and who helped me come up with this experiment. And you have a role. Yes, thank you, Joshua. Really good point. Maybe influencing is actually, again, perhaps if we'd put persuading, we might have got things. This just shows the power of words. And I think as English PhD students, it is, I think we all need a thesaurus and say, if I call this word something different, does my response to it change? So thank you. Well, somebody's got a takeaway. Thank you, Liz. But anyway, going back to our experiment, because I'm excited about this. So Olivia, who is a current PhD student, has agreed to do a live chat with me. So she's going to talk to me about her PhD, and I'm going to ask her questions, as I might. And this came out from the fact that she and I had a conversation within the career coaching context. And she said, oh, actually, Liz, that was rather useful. Perhaps we should try do this. So this is to remind you, this is the sort of conversation you can have with a careers consultant, whether you're one of my students or whether you're another university. These are the sort of resources available to you. So we're going to do this. What doesn't normally happen is the fact that you've got an audience who really want to extract your skills. So I want you to listen to what Olivia and I are saying. We're going to have quite a natural conversation. And I want you to extract skills and spot them. Typing doesn't matter in the chat box, just type stuff down, because then Olivia's going, when we finish the conversation, Olivia will mute and cloak again. She's then going to look at what you've written in the chat box and is going to do a form of evidence analysis. I'm going to come back at the end of our session to show you, what the trends were and perhaps her own thoughts on that. So what I need from you is chatbot liveliness, particularly since I'm going to be concentrating on talking to Olivia, so I won't be able to read it at the same time. So I would like to invite Olivia to uncloak and unmute and join me, and we'll start the conversation. We'll do it for about 5 minutes, and I hope you're poised and ready to extract those skills.
Hi, Liz.
So thank you, and thank you for doing this. So could you like to give me a quick overview about what you're doing in your PhD?
Yeah, sure. And I'm looking forward to hearing about what everybody else thinks, what skills I'm exhibiting. So I'm on a project at the Institute of English Studies, which looks at the values attributed to medieval manuscripts in the early 20th century. So my PhD kind of crosses a lot of boundaries between what we think of as medieval studies and kind of what I think of as modern history or modernist studies. I came to it as I did my undergraduate in history and then my master's in medieval history. And then I took a couple of years out to do various other things outside the academy, and then made my way back into academia by applying for this studentship that was being advertised by my supervisor. So I'm one of a member of about 10 people, 8 to 10 people on my project.
And I mean, I'm immediately interested because you say, you've got this sort of interdisciplinary approach. Yeah, how do you think that makes your PhD different?
I think I think it definitely makes it harder to communicate, especially even to the academy, which is not to say that it's not important, but I have to spend a lot of time convincing a lot of people that it's worth doing. And my supervisor, in order to get this funding for it, also had to spend a lot of time convincing a lot of people that it was worth doing. So so I had to spend a lot of time kind of defending my topic and thinking through new approaches and different kind of angles towards looking at the medieval period, but also looking at the modern period. I'm using source material that doesn't often present itself in the academy. It has sort of been increasingly doing so in book studies over the last few years, but my main primary source material is sales catalogs for books, because we're interested in how books were used in the 20th century in order to, for me specifically, I'm interested in how books were used to make kind of statements about English nationalism and how libraries collected them and where they got them from and who made the decisions to buy medieval manuscripts. And so I'm especially interested in sales catalogs, which are kind of underused resources. I spend a lot of time also looking at letters and correspondence from the early 20th century, which hasn't necessarily been used much in the discipline before. And I look at media reports to get a sense of how it was understood publicly. So I'm looking at different perspectives. I'm looking at the perspective of the British Museum and what it was collecting. I'm looking at the perspective of the individual people who are running the museum and other people from outside of it. And I'm looking at the kind of public perception of these collections of manuscripts and how they were perceived in a kind of wider national sense.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. I mean, how do you such a complex and broad thing? How do you tackle it day to day?
Oh, I spend a lot of my time thinking about what to do next. I sometimes feel like I spend more of my time thinking about what to do next than actually doing what I'm going to do next. But a lot of it involves planning archival trips. A lot of it involves having to decide on a day-to-day basis whether it's a day for secondary reading, primary research, or writing, and figuring out how to prioritize those things, and really having to kind of be in touch with where my project is at. So there's a lot of organizational stuff that goes into it, and to be honest, I don't always feel like I'm terribly good at that. So I have to spend a lot of time reassuring myself that I'm going to be terribly good at that. Day to day, I have a lot of, I spend a lot of my time organizing kind of discussion forums with my team members. And I've also organized my institute's unfinished business seminar for kind of colleagues, because I find that I get a lot out of hearing other people's ideas and hearing how other people are thinking through things. And so I spend a lot of my time. I mean, it's event organization in some respects, but it's also just like, I want to get people together to talk about what they're thinking about, because that helps me kind of process my own thoughts.
Can you tell me a bit more about who you mentioned team members and you mentioned having sort of conversations? So what sort of people do you have conversations with as part of your PhD?
Yeah, definitely team members. And I'm especially privileged in that my team involves English scholars, French scholars, art historians, and my supervisor, of course. I also spend a lot of time talking to other colleagues at my institute who work in modern history, because that's the field I don't feel terribly kind of qualified in. I spend a lot of time talking to other graduate students about how they're doing and hoping that they're not, well, sort of feeling the same way I am about it, but also hoping that they're, maybe less anxious about it than I am, or what have you. Of course, none of us are. We're all feel exactly the same way all the time. And I talk to scholars outside my institute as well, and in the hope of understanding what their what kind of stuff they're working on at the moment, especially at things like conferences. But also, like, I reach out to them via email and say, I really enjoyed your book. You know, I'd love to chat to you a little bit more about my own project. Get your thoughts on it.
Fantastic. And just final questions. So we talked about a lot about the sources and the organization and the conversations. How do you approach, you know, the actual writing?
Oh, I take a lot of notes when I'm reading secondary literature because it helps cement the thinking in my head. But I'm very unlikely to go back and read through my notes all that much, because I tend to find that once it's cemented in my head, it's not that I won't forget it, it's just that the important stuff sticks with me and the less important stuff kind of falls away. So when I'm writing, I might skim my notes really quickly to remind myself of what the important stuff is, but I won't read them terribly in depth. And then I have a specific software program called Scrivener, which is quite useful for visually organizing my paragraphs and that kind of thing. And I create an outline in that, and then I go through and I kind of work on whatever is most obviously coming to the fore in my head, I guess. And then invariably I have to go away and do something else because I hit a block. And then I'll kind of come back to it and I'll be like, okay, well, I can follow this thing now because this is what's to the fore in my mind, even though it's a different paragraph or a different kind of section of the chapter or what have you than what I was working on previously. So I use a variety of kind of methods. Yeah, but everybody has their own process.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think, you know, the chat box, you know, though I haven't been reading it, I've been able to see it out of the corner of my eye, has been lighting up. Yeah. So I think what we can conclude just from that is that certainly you have demonstrated a lot of skills. So I'd like to thank Olivia for putting herself under the microscope, and also to thank all those who've been typing into the chat box. Olivia's now going to leave us and have a look at that chat box. As I say, I can just tell that you're going to have a lot to read, and she's going to come back to us at the end of the session. So thank you, Olivia. We'll see you later. So great. So thank you all. That's so we've just done a global first. You've all made my day. So but let's just look at why did Olivia and I do this? So we had a couple of reasons. I wanted to encourage you to go and talk to a careers consultant. So if some of you think that sort of conversation would be useful to you, then one of the many career services our experience is that PhD students think that we're not for them. So do check out with your graduate school, look for the opportunities within your own university to have conversations like that about your experience. I think also it normalizes. I'm hoping that many of you had residencies and thought, oh, yes, I do that. And hearing somebody pull out the day-to-day, you know, you see the richness and the texture. And I think Olivia absolutely exemplified the texture and the variety of tasks that's found within a PhD. And also because what Olivia has helped me illustrate, and the slide I've got here, is that in order for us to construct a narrative for others, we have to construct it for ourselves. So here I've got an image with somebody who, you know, I'm hoping, and that's what Olivia said to me, that when she and I had a sort of, as it were, less public version of this conversation, that it made the texture and nuance of what she was doing and made it easier for her to see it more clearly, so that her value shone brighter for her. So, you know, still things people say to me are things like, you know, you come to this realization, I realize how organized I need to be. That's quite common, the PhD students say to me, is they take for granted. We often take, if you're doing a difficult thing, you just get on with it. And therefore, having a process like this that helps you reflect and extract, and you start to think, oh, yes, I do have to be quite organized. And this is where we sort of pivot this session a little to say, once we've owned it for ourselves, then we can start crafting a narrative for others. So here's an example, and this is where you really, you know, shine the light, illuminate the light of your value, and this picks up on the sort of things that our panelists were saying earlier. You know, for example, you know, my PhD was a 4-year full-time project culminating in 80,000 word dissertation. Most people don't know how many words, and for some of you, I know you'll be doing 100,000. It varies a little bit for an institution. I did a little bit of research to check. This is quite common, but most people don't know that that's what you do in a PhD. So tell them, particularly in a job where you're required to do a lot of writing. Anybody who can write coherent 80,000 words shows that they can organize their thinking and deliver a sustained project, to quantify it. And then the fact that, the viva, what is the viva? This is academic jargon. Well, it is about defending your thinking against experts. Again, something that will often impress. And it's that sort of first analysing it for yourself, then making it more explicit to others, that helps you present the value of your PhD, and to reassure people that you're going to be an absolute asset in the workplace. And, I've worked with quite a lot of PhD graduates. Generally, they're great to work with because they've already been through PhD boot camp. So here's an example that you might use in an application form, perhaps where you've been asked for an example of your project management. But again, one of the things that I particularly encourage my PhD students to do is to add numbers. I saw the point and I got great satisfaction from someone going, evidence analysis, data analysis. There is something in the humanities which means that sometimes we may unnecessarily shy away from numbers. Even though I suspect I'm in a room with a lot of people like me, I have because of my age, mine's an O level, but I reckon there are plenty of maths, GCSE qualifications in the room, and that's basically what you need to be able to count and do basic numerical comparison. And so I would really encourage you to get into the habit of counting how many, how often, how frequently, how often, and something I work with a lot with my students. So here in this paragraph, we've pulled out 3 numbers. And it's something that if I'd kept going with the conversation with Olivia, I might have started to say, okay, how many people in your team? How often do you meet? How many archives do you visit? Roughly, how many pieces of pieces of data are you looking at? And again, numbers give credibility and punch. And there are numbers embedded throughout all of your PhDs. Do make sure that you pull them out. Now, because of what the people in the room have in common is PhD study, and often what I would call academic enhancement CV lines. Olivia referenced that earlier when she talked a little bit about what it was like organising a conference. I know some of you are organising conferences, some of you are teaching, some of you are publishing, some of you are doing sort of running student societies. And, certainly that's the theme of today, to make sure that you are extracting the value from their activities. But I'd also like to flag up, particularly for my mature students in the room, people come to do humanities PhDs and English PhDs at all ages. That's certainly our experience within the School of Advanced Study. And what I often notice is that people undervalue what they did before and can sometimes internalise what is, unfortunately, one of the sins of British higher education, which is an academic disdain or an academic snobbery, and to actually not to do the same sort of value extraction and skills extraction at the whole range of what they've done. So again, this is something that talking in with your career service can help you do. But do remember, you're a person, not a PhD. And for those of you who have brought the richness of life experience from work, from family caring responsibilities, from volunteering activities, and are now bringing that into a PhD, that experience enriches what you bring to your PhD, and then you have that enrichment and your PhD enrichment to bring to your next career steps. Many of you may be in the position that you're not sure whether you're done with academia. I work with PhD students and graduates at all stages, and I always say, if you are going to leave academia, I want you to leave it with your head held high. It wasn't that you weren't good enough for academia, it wasn't good enough for you. And I hope you heard that, the comments from some of our panelists, from what Kate said, that to some extent, a job market has to work for the people in it, as well as the people working for the job market. And for all of you, it's an individual choice. Some of you have made that decision, or perhaps never wanted to go into academia in the first place. Some of you are still weighing it up. I can think of someone I'm working with at the moment who is 2 or 3 years post PhD, and who is saying to me, she said, I'm not sure, I'm going to give it another year, then I know I did my best and I can walk on to something else. So I'm aware that we've got people, and Chris has just, put an article in the chat box, which frames, many people about the challenges that of the academic job market at the moment, that, Kate also referenced. So you have to make informed decisions, but you also have to leave at the right moment with you, and you have to feel that you left at the right moment for you. So it is perfectly possible to be pursuing and increasing your chances of academic career energetically. And I do coach PhD students who then get academic jobs. They are in a minority, and it does happen. I can think of one recently. And, and then you will know, probably coached by your supervisors, the importance of publications, of conference presentations, of teaching, of getting involved in departmental life. But the good thing is you can be pursuing those things energetically, and they are also still enhancing your value if you decide to go in a different direction. So it's not an either or choice. And I took these qualities. So I was doing some research for this, and Investors in People have got a very nice article, and I've got the reference for you later, on the qualities needed for this VUCA environment that I referenced earlier. And they said this is what people are going to need going forward. And I do think so much of it seemed to me relevant to both PhD study, but also for what I would call these academic enhancement CV lines. That anyone who's had to teach at short notice with limited amount of time becomes very good at finding solutions and prioritizing ruthlessness. That often with publications, you have to be comfortable with uncertainty. The journey to getting peer-reviewed publications is long and uncertain, and you have to wait for quite a long time whether you're actually going to achieve what you're trying to achieve. Curiosity is a word that I think it was Maria really emphasized in her presentation. And I think, again, you can see that not only people's PhD study, but also in the sort of activities that they do as what I call academic enhancement. And here's an example. I have to say, if you've still got members of society in the room, you will recognize this. This was inspired by members of our own PhD postgraduate taught master students society at the School of Advanced Study. It's called Society. And this is a sort of adapted version, as I was inspired by how they organize themselves to support each other and support their academic achievement. And as they were doing it, they both supported each other, and some of them developed some very good academic enhancement CV lines. And here, this is presented in the STAR methodology. So often when you're applying for jobs, particularly if they're publicly funded, you will get questions both at applications and interviews that say, can you give me an example of? The approach that is often very useful to take is known as STAR. Often there'll be resources in your career service on this, where you describe the situation and the task briefly, show the action that you took, and you produce a result. And if you can, you find a way to quantify that result, as has been done here. But I wanted to particularly flag digital skills because I thought that we had a lovely example from Olivia earlier. So I, as well as listen to her as a careers coach, that's my job, but another part of my job is I also still act as a recruiter. And the thing that I remember, now I'm sort of 15 minutes after my conversation with Olivia, was the fact that she used software to organize her thinking. That's a digital skill. And this is another bit of reframing, so that, we, in order to operate in the world now, we are all operating digital skills. We've been operating digital skills today to be able to connect in the Zoom webinar. But again, I see this divide. It goes back to C.P. Snow and the arts and the sciences, is that the humanities, we undersell our digital skills, because digital is not synonymous with being a computer science. So I'd really encourage you to notice when you are using software to do the job of your PhD and to make that very visible in your applications. And so, they say it may be that some of you are using things to organize, to support your evidence analysis and documentation. Some of you will be using social media in certain ways. There's a question here, and I'd really encourage people to type responses into the chat box. Great question from Zakia, and say that, some tips for Zakia on how you organize your time. Great, do a bit of crowdsourcing and shared wisdom there. And also do make sure you're taking advantage while you are a university student of all the digital training that you can. So many universities, for example, make LinkedIn Learning available to their students for free. If your university does that, I was talking to one of my PhD students who's coming towards the end. He said, I'm doing everything I can think of on LinkedIn Learning while I've still got free access. I have a great attitude. So do make sure that is something, because actually most of it's very much like learning languages or text analysis. I think it's very sympathetic to the humanities brain, and lots of it's not that difficult. But again, there can often be a perceptual barrier, both in your sense of identity, and are you the sort of person who does this, but also how you talk about it. So I think that, again, in keeping ourselves modern, in sending a message that we are up to date and relevant, getting comfortable about what your digital skills are and how you can use them and how you are using them and how you talk about it, will make all the difference in the success of your CVs and applications. Thank you, Beth. Thank you. Endorsement from Beth. I had no idea how good my Googling skills were until I got a job outside of academia. We are so good at finding stuff out. Absolutely. I think Maria used that phrase, well-formulated, curious questions. I think so. Absolutely. Thank you, Beth. Great comment. And then, as so we've got the stage here. So you're starting to tell yourself a different story. You're starting to think about how you communicate that study and how the use of different words and almost, and everything you're saying, how could I phrase this differently? Am I in some ways, by looking at this in a certain paradigm, am I excluding or diminishing myself in a certain way? Maria's back with the Queen of Google. Thank you. So that's another great identity to add to our research student identity. And then, conversations. Today, we've had some, our panelists have shared some conversation with us. And we've had what I think the benefit of some exploratory conversation. For some of you, some of what's said has confirmed things that you thought. And I do hope today we've embodied practicing the narrative. And so saying, how can we describe this differently? Those conversations, having conversations in which you explore how differently you could look at your skills, where you check out what jobs actually involve day to day. And I thank our panelists for really making 4 very different areas more visible, but also try different ways of describing yourself. Though having those conversations, what I can guarantee you mean that you will perform better when you come to interview. Too many people to give themselves a hard process by thinking, well, I'm not going to think about this till I have to. So the first time they try and articulate the skills of their PhD is at an interview. That is the hard way to do it. If you've got into the habit of having less formal conversations and checking out conversations and rehearsal conversations with people in a sort of light touch networking sort of way. I was interested, Maria said she got one of her first bits of work through friends of friends. Then, you will make it an easier curve and pivot after your PhD. Also, while you are a student, you don't look like a stalker. There is, for many people, a certain element of goodwill that if somebody who's in education, particularly a PhD student, reaches out to them, you have that aura. Higher education still has an aura of respectability, which you benefit from as a halo effect, which means that people are more likely to be responsive when you have that student status than afterwards. So use that opportunity and use the alumni networks available within your university. And great, thank you, Zakia. And it's great. Thank you, Brooke and Amy, for responding to Zakia's question. So again, what I would encourage you to do, and it would make me so happy if one of the things that some of you do is you ask some new questions of people that you are having conversations with already, inspired by today, pick up, say to your supervisor, I went to this thing, can I talk to you a bit about my longer term career? Because just like Claire, many of your supervisors will have contacts and insights of areas outside of academia. Good time as we all emerge from COVID and the days are getting longer for touching base with your friends and finding out more about what they do and finding out what they do today. And for those of you with work experience, good time to check out with former colleagues who may be delighted to hear from you and hear how their organization. Thank you. There's a lovely phrase. There's a really great thing from Brooke here. You'd be surprised how many people feel honored that they're being contacted by PhD students. Great opening phrase. I am a PhD researcher. Thank you, Brooke. Really great example. Thank you. And I would just leave you because many PhDs, my experience is that people feel shy, and they say, well, actually, how do I get started? And here's a phrase for you. Always look forwards. This relates to the query that was raised about, well, are people going to be negative about my PhD? My experience is that people are, these are challenging times. These are VUCA times. People are hungry for positivity. They like people who are forward facing. Haven't we all been inspired by Richard Ratcliffe? We live in the future, not the past. So if you come across a forward facing, positive and coherent, that is by its definition engaging. Here's a phrase which you can adapt. I am developing my expertise in X, in responding to changes in Y. That, again, do a little bit of research to help you work out what it is you're going to use as that response point. And I'm looking for contexts of experience. Doing a little bit of that in your PhD helps you prepare for what is a natural pivot point at the end of your PhD. And there are some great comments coming in here about people encouraging. I always love it when we see more experienced PhD students encouraging early PhD students about how to manage the PhD workload. So big thanks to those putting into the chat box. So just drawing this session to a close, and we're going to be inviting Olivia back in a moment, that I hope that what you've got from this session and the whole of this event is confidence that your PhD thinking skills and credibility adds punch to your career, will add punch to your career, is adding punch to the careers of our panelists and to Kate. We've talked about extraction and creating the narrative, and I hope that's going to be one of your takeaways. And also, encouraging, as is feasible. And someone said in the question and answers, that, with health challenges, it is hard to combine PhD and work experience. I really want to address that. You can do what's possible, but even more so, I'd encourage you to draw on the support available from your university to help you get the most benefit from everything that it is possible for you to do. And that you don't have to choose at this point. You can make this decision about where you stand in relation to careers in academia or outside of academia after your PhD. But whatever you do, doing academic enhancement and extra things will be adding value to the already extensive value of a PhD. And if I do one thing, I would say, go up with your heads held high. You're really good at evidence analysis. And this is a world that needs an evidence analysis. But unfortunately, they call it data analysis. And in many, many cases, it's just evidence. You can do it. And I think that hold yourself that confidence, doing a bit of quick training on Future Learn or LinkedIn Learning, that will open up whole new avenues for you professionally. So thank you, Zakia. That's so helpful. So what I love to see at the end of the session is for people to type into the chat box what might be your next step in the next week, in the next month, in the next 3 months in developing your communication transferable skills. I think I've got a typo there. Anyway, you get the point. So think of your next step. And this doesn't just have to come from this session. Think about the whole of this afternoon. What might you do differently? And it might be that you're thinking differently, you're reflecting on something, finding something out, talking to somebody, taking some action. No wrong answers. So put those into the chat box while Olivia and I fiddle around with tech. And I'll just give you some encouragement from one of my favorite PhD graduates who used to work for me. And she said, tell them to keep a journey of progress of what they do every day, because it's sometimes hard to see how you're making progress on such a big project. That's true for your PhD project. So for people like Zakia starting out, you may find that useful, that daily log, bullet point a day, so that you don't feel that you're not getting anywhere. It's also very true of career development. So stand tall. The horizons are broad. Your University Career Service or Doctoral Training Partnership Career Service is there to help you. There are resources like Vitae and Imagine PhD, and I've included in the slides that reference from Investors in People earlier. So that's all from me. I'm going to stop sharing and then invite Olivia to share. And thank you. I can see many people starting to put their points into the chat box. The research says that if you type it into the chat box, you're more likely to do it, which means your career is likely to go better. So do yourself a favor, type it into the chat box and improve your luck. On that note, I'll stop sharing and hand over to Olivia. Over to you.
Okay, I'm just going to share. So thank you, everybody, for the absolutely overwhelming volume of skills that I didn't know I had, but it's very good to be told. I've taken everybody's responses and put them into this thematic word cloud, which everybody might notice is in the form of a book. Can everybody see this? Can you see this, Liz? Yeah, okay, great.
Yep.
This is rough, but actually that said, I think I'm going to print it out and put it over my desk. And I will also, I think I'll send it to Ellie, and maybe we'll put it up on the IES website or something as like some of the skills that English PhDs might have or something like that. But this is, yeah, okay, Ellie's pleased as well. The team bit, I'm not so sure, anyway, we'll sort that out. But I found this really useful both for myself and also for a variety of reasons, possibly for other people, because there's so much here, and there's so many different kind of terms here that I sort of have heard, or like have definitely heard before, but wouldn't necessarily apply to myself, or wouldn't have necessarily thought to apply to PhD, to like an English PhD. So I realized that one of them, because I spent a lot of time talking about my team, one of them is team, because people kept putting teamwork and team kind of management in. And that I realized that's not necessarily going to be the case for everybody, but we all work within departments to some extent, and we all have other people that we're working with, whether we do that all the time or not. So just wanted to kind of highlight that might be less relevant, but there's so much here that we've talked about already today. And one of the, things like analysis, things like I saw that there's evidence over here, and then over here there's data. So if we combine those two, that would be like a bigger term. Research, obviously huge. Organization, a really big one. I thought we've got digital over here and software. I thought one of the really interesting ones for me was the word different over here. And then if you take that and you apply it to a whole bunch of the other kind of terms mentioned, because the way the software I used, it doesn't necessarily keep the terms together, but we have different perspectives and we have critical, just being able to look at sort of different sides of things, different types of different evidence, different ideas, I thought was a really a kind of interesting thing to be able to take out of this. And one of the other things that I wanted to kind of highlight was that Liz has spent so much time today talking about, and Kate and Claire have spent so much, and our panelists have spent so much time talking today about how as English PhDs, we have the ability to understand manipulate and determine language. And I think this word cloud kind of does a really good job of showing just how much language is at our disposal and how much control we have over it to pitch ourselves as what we want to be and what what the kind of change we would like to see. So we have the ability to say that what we do is evidence analysis, or we have the ability to say that what we do is data analysis or project networking, or however we want to describe it. But we have that power to kind of present ourselves as we wish to be understood. So that seemed to me, the word cloud seemed to me to kind of embody that rather well. And this is obviously, like, there are plenty of things on here that I don't feel I necessarily do all that well. But the point is that if I emerge from a PhD having done it, then I have these skills. So I think they probably apply to me, but they almost certainly apply to almost everybody in this webinar as well.
And what a wonderful way to finish. I want this on a t-shirt. And so to thank Olivia, to thank you all for creating what I think is a global first. The first pieces of legacy from this afternoon. So thank you for that. I'm going to share my screen. I can see Claire will probably finish for it, but I'm just going to share my screen because we would love your evaluation. We've tried some new things today. And I want you to help me prove Ellie wrong, because she said that nobody would fill in the evaluation form. So she's going to put it into the chat box, and you're going to prove her wrong, aren't you? Because we would love to hear your comments. We want to build on this. And with that, I'll hand over to Claire to just close us out.
So thank you, Liz. I wasn't going to close us out. I was going to let you do it, but you've been so remarkable throughout the whole of this session. And I just want to thank you in particular, but I also want to thank Olivia for, as I think somebody put in the chat box, being so brave and so exciting. I want to thank all our panelists who have been terrific. I feel inspired. I think I need to go out and get another job. I think my job might be to help think about doing this regularly so that we can really help you achieve your potential in the job market. So thank you so much indeed. And do complete the survey. All right.
So thank you, Claire. And it's my job to do the final close and say, we will share all the resources, all those questions coming in. So Ellie's on that. And I'd just like to wish you a great evening. And thank you for being just a fabulous co-creators of this session. And I hope to come across many of you in the future in the wonderful PhD space in which it is a privilege to work. I wish you all well with your PhD and your career development. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.